Hey, greetings everyone. This is Josh here with another episode of Horror Hangouts. And tonight's guest, we have Jacob Floyd, who is a writer. He does a lot of content, runs one of the groups in Facebook. How are you doing today, Jacob?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing fine. So tell me, let's see. Well, I guess tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what some of your, I guess, horror related and mainly writing related interests are and activities.
Oh, well, most of my activities these days revolve around me trying to build something that I'm trying to build, whether it's doing Nightmare Press or trying to do more with my blog, Jacob Floyd's Ghosts and Monsters, or the House of Dark Fiction group to help. I'm trying to use the latter two to help a lot of people in the community and to help the community itself. And of course, Nightmare Press, I'd like to help. I like to use that, give people, you know, outside of a lot of the circles and cliques, a chance to have their voices heard and their work read. Um, and that's honestly that's mostly activities I do anymore, besides other work. Today, my wife and I went to a farm where they were doing hug a horse because they wanted people to, you know, hear more about horses and other farm animals as opposed to watching the Kentucky Derby, which they felt is an evil thing, and they don't like the way the horses are treated. So that was about the only. That's the first real activity we've done in a while. So
Yeah, I could never get excited about horse racing for some reason. I guess, it's a bunch of hype for something that lasts for like one big lap around. I'm like,
yeah,
okay. So,
not interesting to me, and I guess that's a lot of people don't want to hear that, considering I live right here in Louisville.
hmm
But I'm not about that stuff. It's not interesting to me. I don't really care about all the politics. I mean, as long as they're treating the horses, I don't know how they treat them. I was hoping as long as they treat them humanely, then that matters to me. But outside of that, I don't really care. You know.
so what exactly is Nightmare Press? Is this like a publishing company?
Yes, I started Nightmare Press in 2018 to publish other horror authors. And at first, it was meant to just be horror. Since then, I've decided to expand it beyond just horror, but into other dark fiction genres,
hmm
and which are there are many. Um, but I guess I did it. I did it because I just recognized that there's a lot of gatekeeping in the indie horror community,
hmm
and just a lot of groups that would keep people out I mean, I don't want to go into details because I don't want to say anything necessarily bad or drudge up anything horrible. But I had a lot of bad experiences myself with people in the community, and I'd seen a lot of bad experiences happen with other people, with a lot of the same people that I had problems with in the community. And I just kind of thought, you know what? I don't like the way some of these people treat other people. I kind of want to make something a little more fair, a little more merit based. I mean, of course, you can't publish everybody, right? But yeah,
Exactly.
the whole point of Nightmare Press was to really be an alternative, also to the same things that were being published over and over and over with a lot of presses who are all connected. You know what I mean? Like, this guy over here starts a press. Maybe he was the first, and they start publishing a whole bunch. And one of his authors decided to start a press, and they're publishing all the same people he published. And then they
hmm
might find another few people, and then one of those people starts a press, and then they're publishing all his people. And it's just a big cycle of a bunch of friends just publishing each other, and that's
Right.
fine. I'm not knocking it because if it works for them, great.
hmm
I'm glad all of them are getting their voices heard and getting their work out there. But it comes to a point, either intentionally or unintentionally, where other people start getting kept out. And I know some people were keeping people out based on whatever they believed in or based on whatever they perceived about them.
Mm.
And then I think other companies were just not publishing anybody new because they already had a full list. Because you can only publish so many people, even the bigger companies, right?
Right.
And you get some of these up places get like 80 authors. I mean, I guess they're probably not going to open up to anybody else, and eventually. But yeah, I just wanted to do something new and give other people a chance, and also just give something that's the type of horror and dark fiction that just doesn't really get a chance anymore. A chance, because I know there's a lot of authors out there who write it and want to publish it. So.
Yeah, I had to myself for my first book. I had to resort to basically self-publishing, and it's fine in one aspect that you can just go ahead and just do it and get it out there, but from the whole distribution part of it, marketing part of it, it's kind of a little bit of a hindrance, I guess you could say. And so it's good that there's people like yourself out there helping people get their works published.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, that's something I could talk about for a long time too, because I have experiences dealing with big publishers too. And
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, like when it comes to self-publishing is really not as bad as people think. Now it can be, because obviously any Joe Blow can publish a book, right? They could
Right.
write a book about something stupid, doesn't make any sense, put the worst cover possible on it, never edit it. They have no concept of grammar, and they can publish their book, right? But the fact of the matter is, a lot of those people, they're not really going to get to the top, and they're not going to get that well noticed. But what they're going to do is create an entire ocean of garbage. But self-publishing can really work for people,
Mm-hmm.
um, if they can market themselves and they put out a quality product that's going to get a good word of mouth going. But at the same time, that's also difficult for a lot of people, and it's better to have other people backing you up, because even with small press, the promotion's still difficult, right?
Right.
And distribution is still a lot smaller, and because the risk is bigger, and but at the same time, like if you're published with by yourself, then you're just pushing yourself, right? You don't have anybody else doing it for you unless you have friends who are doing it for you. But if
Mm-hmm.
you but if you publish with like somebody who's trying to do what I'm trying to do, then at least you got me publishing it on our press page, and then I'll put it in the group, and I'll put it elsewhere, like I'll blog about it. So, and maybe other people will see it and share. I mean, it gives you a better opportunity to do word of mouth, because if grassroots is really a lot of the best ways to do it, unless you're exceptionally well funded.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I've learned is it's not just enough as a self-published author just to put out, put out posts on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Also part of Slasher as well, and say, hey, here's my book, here's my link. You really have to get out there and form relationships with the people following you, because that's what made me buy books from other authors and vice versa, was forming those relationships. So just putting, um, like I said, just making a random post in itself isn't really going to do much for you.
Yeah, especially like I've put this in the House of Dark Fiction once. When it comes, if you are going to share your post, which you should, I mean, you still should share your stuff. Just don't beat people over the head with it until they get pissed off.
Right.
But it's better if you have a nice looking post. Don't just share the Amazon link, because the
Mm-hmm.
Amazon link just shows the book and the white background, and nobody wants to look at that, right? I always try to make. I'm not an exceptional visual artist. I mean, I'm not real good. That's not my wheelhouse. But I make promo ads for all the books, um, and I go to BookLinker and get a shorter a shorter link, so you don't have the gigantic, you know, 400 million character Amazon link on there. And it's all about making the presentation look better. Um, and the other point the other point you made, about just sharing it. What was it you said? Sharing it on Instagram and Twitter and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's difficult too. And I mean, you can go and you can take out Facebook ads and Amazon ads, but when you're smaller, it's more difficult to do that and make an impression.
Right.
Unless you got tons of money, you can keep putting it out there. It can work, but I mean, like from the press perspective, it's better for me to grow attention to that page than it would be for me to say to take my own book that I might publish under there, or for the author who publishes, to just constantly share that. So like for me, like I'm going to try and boost to get people to watch Nightmare Press, and then when I start sharing all the books and stuff, hopefully, or the website, they'll go to that. Another point you made about forming relationships, and that's always important because you get these people who just do nothing but post promos
Hmm.
all the time. Nobody wants to talk to them. I've been so busy lately. I've gotten guilty of that because I've got several profiles, and
Hmm.
I'm using them all for business purposes now. I used to I kept getting hacked, so I kept creating other profiles, but so now I just decided to put them all to use. And but a lot of people say other authors aren't your audience, and in a sense that's true, but in a sense that's not, because reading is like not what it used to be, right? A lot of people still read, but I mean, authors read other authors, but that's also how you can help you reach out beyond just other authors, like networking with people, because you meet
Hmm.
readers through this stuff too, because they follow other authors. Um,
Right.
and of course, your target audience, if you want to try that with certain other platforms, then yeah.
Yeah. And even I'm guilty of that too. I like, because I get so busy, I forget, I need to go and engage with this person or that person. That person liked that post. I need to like engage with them at least a little bit just to say, hey, thanks for the like, even something simple as that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can be a hard thing. But basically, you have 1,000 other authors basically doing the same thing as you. So trying to find a way to make yourself stand out is like probably might be the most difficult thing, as far as being an indie author, I think.
Yeah, and it's like you take a look at certain sectors of the horror community. I use the splatterpunk community as a good example. A lot of them, like, their biggest audience is other authors. It's each other, and
Hmm.
but yet they still sell a lot of books, um, and a lot of them will have, hundreds of reviews that they're getting because they networked with other authors, and through these other authors, they met other readers. You got to think, someone who was with Leisure Books back before it closed,
Hmm.
and ended up with, say, somebody like Deadite Press, who picked up authors like Wrath and Brian Keene and all those guys, the ones who got a little bit of a following before it all shut down. So you network with other authors, you meet people like that, and then you meet their readers, and then or the readers find you, and it just kind of fans out from there. Now that's not saying that I think someone should only friend somebody just to get their followers. I think that's kind of slimy, but
Right.
but it's good to actually know other authors, because and now you can't just it's not just about growing your following. When you meet other authors who are veteran authors, if you meet some of the few who are actually willing to give you some advice and actually willing to help, and because they care about the community, when you
Hmm.
meet someone like that, that can make you better as an author too, and that can make you be able to help somebody else and help the community. That's kind of how I view it. I think, I don't know, I've always been more centered on helping the community as a whole than I have been pushing my own work. Because there was, for a long time, a lot of other people didn't even know I was an author, because I was usually talking about other people's books.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know why I'm like that. I shouldn't be, because It's gotten me in more trouble than anything else. But I guess it's because I've always loved the written word, and I love the craft of writing and storytelling, and I just want to see it do well.
Yeah, I think we all do. So you mentioned about yourself being a writer. What's some of the, I guess maybe the most recent books that you've written and published?
Uh, the most recent book that I've completed is called Hearts in the Hourglass. Um, I haven't published it yet because I've been working on trying to get other people published and getting everything else going back up. Because I guess that kind of goes back to where for me it's like the writing is just something I do. I'm not real big on trying to make myself well known. Um, but that's not really, that's got elements of all kinds of different genres in it, and it actually started out as a joke, but then it got serious and really personal. And but it's a real messed up, probably weird book for anybody that would actually read it. They'd probably be like, what the f is this? This is crazy, but it makes sense to me.
Right.
It was more
Oh,
it's more surrealist and experimental and absurdist more than anything. But my most recent horror book was Night of the Possums, and I put that out like 2018. Um, and then I put out a paranormal nonfiction book, Kentucky Strange and Unusual Haunts, in 2019.
excellent. And are all those available on Amazon or any other links?
Night of the Possums and Chainsaw Sisters. Actually, I think Chainsaw Sisters was actually after Night of the Possums. I'm not sure. That one just started out as me being silly too, and then developed into a book. And it's got some short stories in it as well. But they those books are available on Amazon. Kentucky Strange and Unusual Hunts is available on Amazon. My first indie press horror novel is no longer available. It was published through Hellbound Books. It's now out of print. I'm going to probably republish it under Nightmare Press eventually. And I think two of our original paranormal nonfiction books are no longer available, but we're going to eventually publish those again too.
Okay, good. So so who were like some of the writers that I guess influenced you, or you just happen to be a fan of that maybe
Yeah, I
that you
think
just made you want to write?
yeah, it's hard to say because I've always liked writing ever since even when I was a little kid and I didn't even realize it. But I used to write short stories when I was a little kid. They weren't really short stories; they were more like just outlines of ideas with some dialogue here and there. But for me, mostly it's writer authors that I'm a fan of more than influence. I think if anybody ever actually influenced my writing that made me say to myself, I want to try and write more like that person, it was Clive Barker. And not so much for the content that he wrote, but for the way he wrote, for his prose and for the narrative and the structure that he used and his ability to use grammar properly and expand, you know what I mean? Just like
Hmm.
the way his books were put together. But to be honest, I wasn't really a horror fan, a horror reader for years until I decided I wanted to try writing horror books, which my horror books are more dark fantasy anyway, because I've always been a fan
Hmm.
of fantasy. Um, but some of my favorite authors are like Dostoevsky's probably my favorite. John Steinbeck's one I've always liked. Charles Dickens, Jules Verne. I don't like a ton of Verne's work. I've really only read two books by him, but 20,000 Leagues is one of my favorite books.
Hmm.
I, as far as horror authors are concerned, since I've started reading horror more, I haven't really found a whole lot that I've connected with. But like, I like Robert McCammon and I like Richard Lehman.
Yeah, it's strange because, well, you mentioned Clive Barker. And I've been a big fan of that, of the movies forever.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
it wasn't until about a little over a year ago that I finally sat down and read Hellbound Heart and read Scarlet Gospels. And that's what kind of made me think, you know what, I'm going to give this a try as far as writing goes. And so he kind of also maybe, once again, I wouldn't say I like trying to emulate him, but it certainly gave me a kickstart into writing. And since then, I've been reading a lot more horror and have, like so, met other authors and have read their works, and it's maybe somehow subconsciously is hopefully is making me a better writer. But I still have to work on certain things, like you mentioned, structure and grammar and the technical aspects of writing, which I think is probably the more difficult part than just coming up with your story and your characters.
yeah, it really is. It's a harder part. I think for some, and I think others maybe not, but like I take a look at a lot of the horror books I've read, and again, I'm going to reference extreme horror and splatterpunk books. A lot of those authors, they have good stories and they write good stories and interesting stories, but you can tell the technical aspects they struggle with,
Hmm.
like grammar and punctuation, or well, punctuation is grammar essentially, just editing and stuff. And I've been hard on them about that in the past, but then it's like I kind of really realized this. It's entertainment, and as long as it's an interesting story and people are entertained by it, that's really what counts. And I think that's the big thing. Like I do think people need to polish their work. I think don't be lazy and just write it and throw it out there and not even try. But I think with indie press, I think people should ease up a little bit because they also got to remember when you get big, well, I call them big four anymore because that's essentially what they are. But with like big four books, big trade, and even bigger, even big New York publishers who aren't part of the big four
Hmm.
and mid level presses, you got a ton of money going into editing, right? You got people editing it more than once, right? And editors, I mean, a lot of self-published authors and indie authors, they can't afford the editing prices, and I don't fault the editors because they got to get paid for their
Right.
work. It takes time, but the bottom line is a lot of people just can't, so they got to try to edit it themselves. And I mean, there's going to be stuff that sneaks through, right? And,
Right. I know that all too well because I
yeah,
was in that boat. I didn't really have the money to uh, hire an editor or anything like that, so I'm pretty much doing it on my own. And then when finally I did find someone who just looked it over and gave me a few critiques of what I needed to improve, I had to go back, revise the book, and then republish it again. But
yeah,
it's better to do that, catch it when you can, and get it done right, even if it takes you the second or third time doing it.
right. And like I've got I've got an editing background, I've got editing experience, and I self edit, and I go over my books. I've in the past I've gone over my. There was one book I went over 18 times, right? And I think it was Night of the Possums.
Uh
Uh,
huh.
I went over that like myself. I edited that book. I'm not talking about just the first draft of writing. I went over that book editing wise 18 times, and there were still a few a few errors that got loose, and one of them was early in the book. So it's just crazy. Same thing with The Pleasure Hunt, my first horror novel. I went over that book probably 12 or 13 times. And in the first chapter, there was a glaring error that I missed because I changed a sentence. And so it changed the way I used your the first time to the way I was supposed to use it. Like it was like, your name isn't supposed to be this. I changed that from you are not supposed to do this, but I didn't change the your. So I had the wrong your in there. And I was
I've
like,
done that.
and that is one of the most common fuck up mess ups someone can make, you know.
Oh,
And it's like, damn, oops.
well, they say the English language is the hardest language to learn, and I can understand now why.
I
Because
believe it.
there's, yeah,
Hell, I mean, how many people in America how many people who speak English know how to speak it properly 100%? You know what I'm saying?
no,
Like,
exactly.
it's messed up. It's a crazy language, that's for sure.
Yeah. So besides the writing, have you also been like a fan of horror movies?
Yeah, that I was a fan of growing up. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of those 80s horror because I was born in 1980. So I was a little kid during all that crap. And so I guess it'd have been better to have been born in like 1970 or 75 or something like that because
I
maybe
was 74, so
you was a little older and got to enjoy them a little more. But I saw a
mm,
lot of them when I was like 8, 9, in between the ages of like probably 7 and 13. I watched a lot of that crap. And whether it's going to the store and renting them or whatever, catch. Because in the 90s, there weren't really a lot of great horror movies. But like a lot of the good ones in the 90s, in the 80s, yeah, I was a big fan of those. But I was also like a big fan of like the fantasy films from the 80s too. And I was a big fan of those 1980s and early 90s role playing fantasy games for Nintendo and Super Nintendo.
oh
And
yeah.
if anything, those inspired me more than than any horror stuff. And of course, Tolkien inspired me, his work, and the probably the most horror related inspiration I've had is R.L. Stein's Goosebumps. And you got to look at it. His stuff, that stuff was really more dark fantasy, so than it
Yeah.
was horror. So there was a lot of supernatural aspects. So I've just always kind of been into that stuff. But
Yeah, horror has a lot of overlaps with different genres.
right, yeah, like really, when you look at stuff like the psychological horror, anything that has to do with like serial killers and just murder, and even the gory stuff like the splatterpunk stuff, that's really all just kind of a subgenre of crime fiction, isn't it? I mean, when you
Yeah,
really
kind of like Jalo.
yeah, Jalo, yeah, and that's what it is. It's really just a subgenre of that, and I think it was Stephen King himself, the guy who people call the master of horror, said that horror is really just fantasy. I think it was him who said that.
Hmm. Well,
So
it's a form of fantasy, really.
it really is, and that's essentially what dark fantasy is. It's horror, supernatural horror is just dark fantasy, and splatterpunk gory horror is really just giallo, like I said, or some subgenre of crime. And then you
Hmm.
get like psychological horror. That's really kind of a crime thing too, and suspense. So horror is kind of really just broken up. It's kind of just this. It's really a subgenre in itself, kind of a way to maybe bring prevailing attitudes together more than just genre styles.
So, what were some of your favorite movies that you first kind of like latched on to?
As far as this horror,
Yeah.
uh, The Return of the Living Dead, definitely. I've seen that movie so many times. I probably damn near know the entire script. The Lost Boys, that was a big one for me. I think everybody says that one, right?
Right.
That's when I was really. Those are probably, and of course the Friday the 13th movies. My parents shouldn't have been letting me watch those, but I was watching them when I was like 8, and and I saw a lot of those. Though I've always thought like Jason was interesting. I think Jason's character in my mind sort of created the ultimate badass character that I always try to bring into my stories.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like, even though it's like he was kind of supernatural, but he wasn't. It was hard to say. But I lost interest in horror when I got into my teen years, like my mid to late teen years, with the exception of reading Goosebumps. But like the books or the movies, like I don't like the Scream movies. I don't like the Final Destinations. I don't like I Know What You Did Last Summer really all that much. More power to anybody who does. There's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
that. I just wasn't into it. But I started to kind of like horror again a little bit with the Saw movies when they the first couple. But then after like that, they kind of just got a little. I don't know. Although I did like part six more or less for the political message. But I think a lot of the elevated horror nowadays is improving horror. But I got into the giallo when I was in my early 20s, and and like Fulci and Argento and Matai and was it Umberto Lenzi and all that. I don't always like the content of their movies, in the sense of like I don't really get into gore. Gore doesn't bother me
Hmm.
at all, because hell, it's in my stories if you've ever read any of mine. But it's just the style in which they're produced. Like Lucio Fulci, especially, he had like zero money for his movies. Right, his budgets were terrible, but somehow he made some really beautiful scenes. And there's a scene in one of my all-time favorite cinematic scenes, I guess, is in Don't Torture a Duckling, when
Hmm.
they when that woman, I forgot her name, she wanders out of the town and out into the field, and these guys follow her. They get out of the car and they beat her to death. But just, I mean, normally that's not something you would say is beautiful, right? It's not, because the content in itself is actually pretty
Right.
terrible. But just the way Fulci did it with the music and the camera shots and the tricks, it was just so wonderfully done. Like, I was just amazing, and that he could do that with like no money. So, even though
It's interesting you mentioned Fulci. I just watched the Beyond for the first time last night,
yeah,
for the first time, and I'm like, wow.
yeah, there's, I mean, like, that's the thing. I was gonna say that, like, the scripts to his movies are full of so much bull crap. Like, they're full of holes, and they're not well written.
Mm.
and they don't make any sense. But even Fulci himself once said something to the effect of he thinks of his films as more of a phantasmagoria of nightmarish scenes and pictures and images. So he was all about the appearance. He didn't really care about the story, right? And it's
Right.
like in the Beyond, there's so much stupid stuff that happens in the Beyond. But like I think one of the dumbest ones is the tarantulas eating the guy's face. Tarantulas don't do
Yeah,
that.
that one.
They don't
Well,
do that
and just
crap.
came, and it just comes out of nowhere. And
Yeah,
I'll
like
admit that scene had me cringing, and I don't cringe very easy. Like, ugh.
and like when he takes the little I don't know, its leg or whatever, just stabs the guy in the eye, and his eye starts bleeding. Like they ain't gonna be able to do that. Like, and they pull his tongue off, and I'm like, what? And the scene where I think the woman's visiting her dead husband before they bury him, and he sets up and he pushes her head against a nail, and it goes all the way through her head and pops out her eye. But it's the back side of the nail. It's the flat end of the nail that's not going to go through anybody's head. And even if it was the sharp end, it still wouldn't pierce all the way through your skull. You know what would probably happen? He probably would have just pushed it back into the wall. As long as he would have done with someone's skull. But it looked cool. Like when the
Yeah,
eyeball pops out, it looks good. So that's the fun about Fulci's films is they just look good.
yeah, and that's what they're there for. And it's interesting you mentioned around the late '90s horror. I was kind of the same way too. I didn't necessarily lose interest in horror. It was just horror got too clean for me. So
Yeah.
that what made me search for other titles if I could. And then yeah, when the early 2000s came around, there came Saw. I also happen to be a fan of Rob Zombie's work, so House of the Thousand Corpses came
Yeah. I like
out,
yeah.
and I was like, great, horror is now dirty again,
Right.
and
Yep, I know, and that's the thing. And by dirty, like I know what you mean. It doesn't even have to be super gory. It just has to be gritty and look like it had like it was like a clean cut corporate image in the '90s, And that's why I still argue with people who say they wish horror literature would get big again. I don't. I don't want it to get big again because if it does, it's probably going to suck. Like it's not. It's gonna be
see what you
turned
mean.
into watered down a cookie cutter nonsense. And even as much as I critique the splatterpunk community for a lot of the people, I feel like they're just writing the same books over and over. I still think that's better um, than it would be if like big companies got a hold of it and turned it into junk. Because at least those people are creative to the sense where like they don't bind themselves by any sort of boundaries and they will just write anything, even if no matter even if the masses think it's stupid, like a turd monster having sex with its sister and then cutting up its entire family with a chainsaw or shooting rifles up their butts. That's whatever you people might think about that content. At least it's creative,
Yeah,
and stuff like that. I mean, I don't mind content like that as long as it's done well. And if you got corporate companies, big companies would try to clean that up because let's be honest, that's a niche product. Most people don't like that stuff.
hmm
And I want that stuff to continue to exist. So I don't want it to be wiped out. Which is I'm a fear of what would happen if um, you know big four companies started taking interest in horror again.
yeah, and of course you see it too in the movies because the movies that get pushed by the bigger studios are the umpteenth sequel to this movie or another reboot or remake and all that. But the better movies, the original movies that are being made by smaller studios. It's of course A24 is starting to get big, so hopefully I hope they don't get too
I
big
don't
for
know.
their own britches because because Blumhouse didn't start off the way they are now. So hopefully A24 stays on their same path.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah, and you're seeing it with Bloomhouse. When things get bigger, they start to not be as good. I mean, and really, you can look at the big franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, compare the first one to Jason versus Freddy. You know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
the first one, we're not even going to count the reboots because reboots don't count anyway. But like the first one had that sort of new, original, sort of frightful vibe about it.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say gritty like the '70s films, but it had an underground sort of punk vibe. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking
Right.
about?
Exactly.
And but you get to Jason versus Freddy, it was all commercial bullshit. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
have that vibe. It was just, let's make it about the kills because the kills are what's cool, right? And let's make it just, suddenly Freddy knows martial arts because martial arts is popular now. Let's have these two guys who look like Jay and Silent Bob get killed, because it's funny. And let's put fucking Kelly Rowland in the movie because just because Destiny's Child, like, so it was just like, I don't know, and that's, you can do that with any of them. You can look at the first Friday the 13th and same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The first Friday the 13th atmospherically had sort of that old giallo feel to it.
Exactly. Very Bay of Blood inspired, I always thought.
Yeah, and the way, and the lot of the way it was filmed and the way it was directed. But then, like, again, lead right back into what I just said: Jason versus Freddy's junk. I mean,
Well, what they forgot about is behind all those great horror movies of the 80s, there was always a good, strong protagonist.
right.
Whether it was, in the Friday the 13th, it was Alice or Jenny, who, by the way, Amy Steele, it's her birthday today. So happy birthday,
Uh,
Amy Steele. Not that she's listening, but,
you never
and of
know.
course, you had Tommy Jarvis, you had, in the Nightmare, you had Heather Langenkamp as Nancy, and on and on. Laurie Strode in Halloween, uh, Kirsty Cotton, my favorite, in Hellraiser. The problem with Jason versus Freddy, you had protagonists no one gave a shit about.
Right. Yeah,
Had
they're all,
you brought back, wouldn't it have been great if they could have brought back maybe Corey Feldman to play Tommy Jarvis and just bring back to life Nancy Thompson and had them in the movie, then it would have been more interesting.
yeah, it would have been far more interesting. Yeah, they could have just pretended like that was all a dream, because my friend and I, the guy who helps me run Nightmare Press, Bobby Shupeck, he was like, for a long time, I didn't like Nightmare on Elm Street, and I was telling him why. I said I thought it because it was full of holes and it didn't make any sense. But like he brought up this theory to me that, like, well, it was the whole movie itself was probably a dream. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started thinking about that, and I added to that. I thought, well, that makes sense, because even though you didn't really find out Freddy wasn't he was also a pedophile. You found that out in like part 5, where they were flipping through the newspapers and it called him that. But you knew he was always a child killer, and it was always
Mm-hmm.
implied, right? So it's like I started thinking, what if the first Nightmare on Elm Street, like he said, was a dream, was Nancy's dream, but it was her coping mechanism. Like, she was Fred Krueger, one of Fred Krueger's victims, and
Right.
that's how she coped with it, by creating all that. And like, then I thought, if that were the case, and like maybe Freddy was her uncle or her dad, and the guy in the movie was a cop, and maybe that was the cop who saved. So it opens up all these possibilities. So in her dream, she made him her dad. I thought it opened up all these possibilities, because at the end, Freddie jumped on top of her mom and took her down into the bed. So that was almost kind of like, was Freddie connected to her mom? Was that her real dad? And this cop
Mm-hmm.
was just the cop who saved her? So that started made me think all that stuff. And that's just how my mind works. So I might be reading too much into it. But if that were the case, I think that would make that one of the most brilliant movies ever made. So, and then you could go on and say maybe all of those movies were dreams. And then if they wanted to do that, they could have said, well, Nancy's not really dead. She didn't die in part 3. That was just her dream. Well, we got her and Tommy Jarvis. So that would have been cool, yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, well, how many times has Halloween like changed timelines and brought
Uh,
Laurie Strode back to life at least twice that I'm aware of? And
yeah, Halloween. I don't know. To me, Michael Myers, the first Halloween, to me is the best of all of them, in my opinion. I mean, all of them: Jason, Freddy,
mm-hmm.
Hellraiser, all of them. I mean, to me, other than the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween is probably, in my opinion, the greatest horror movie ever made. Um, but again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is pretty high up there. And I know that's an arguable point. That's up for discussion with anybody.
Mm.
But to me, it just, it really shouldn't have gone past that. Like, maybe part 2, maybe, even though there was some dumb crap, that whole, when they started introducing all the convoluted storylines of Sam Hain and then the Thorn movies with Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
I like those movies for what they were. Like there were
Mm-hmm.
parts of those movies I thought they were well done, but they were unnecessary. Like I feel like Halloween would have probably just been best if it had just ended with Michael Myers getting up off the ground and nobody knows where he went. Maybe 20 years later make a better sequel. I don't know, but
Well, which was the intent originally by Carpenter, but studios want. I guess you could say all movies are unnecessary, but they wanted a sequel. I thought two was a perfect continuation because I look at those first two movies as almost one big movie
yeah,
almost.
yeah, because I
You know,
liked part two. I think part two would have been passable. It'd have been okay, just leaving out the whole changing Laurie Strode's identity and the Sam Hain stuff. Minus that, I think the movie would have been a perfect ending. Because Loomis went out with him. So
yeah.
and and I'm sorry, but the
I always
part where
thought that four.
I was going to say,
Go ahead.
to me, one of my all-time favorite movie scenes is because it's just ridiculous. It was just silly the way it was done. Is when Michael just walks through the glass door into the hospital in part two, and like, I want that movie to exist just because of that scene.
I want that movie to exist just for the hot tub scene.
Yeah, yeah, that was a good scene too. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say I always like if I were going to pick my perfect Halloween trilogy, it would be 1, 2, and 4, only because everything comes full circle. Because the way one starts off, Michael kills his sister in a clown outfit. Halloween 4 ends with his niece killing her stepmother with a pair of scissors, also in a clown outfit. So it just kind of prolongs the whole theme that you can't kill evil. It always remanifests itself. And they had
Yeah, that
fished
would.
it right there and not done 5 or 6. That would have been just almost the perfect ending to that series. But you could say the end of 1 was the perfect ending, or the end of 2 was the perfect ending.
Yeah, yeah. Part five. Here, my issue was like, even if you would have continued it, all right. Part four would have been a lot. This has just never made sense to me. All right, so part four, they shoot Michael, right, and he falls into that whatever that is, that well or whatever they
Yeah.
got digging going on over there, man at work stuff they got going on. All right, and so then they go back to the house and they're like, Michael's dead, right? And then they wait till the beginning of part five to show us that they threw dynamite down in the well. Now that would have been a whole lot better ending to part four if they would have thrown the dynamite in. Then you'd been like, oh well, shit. Because at first you're like, well, he's gotten up from gunshots before, but then they throw dynamite down, and you're like, all right, that son of a bitch ain't coming back. He's dead. Then part five comes out, and you're like, how the hell did he survive that? And then you find out he just crawled out and down the river. And even though living with that guy for a year was kind of stupid, would they like live in a little house, like a shed? I mean, it's like what? But it was almost like because the follow up from H2O to that god awful movie with Busta Rhymes in it, like that follow up was good because you thought, all right, she cut his head off. He's got to be
That
dead.
should be done. And that's another good alternate trilogy, 1, 2, and H2O, because that's like completes Laurie Strode's whole arc, and you could just ended it right there, and that'd been perfect. But no, we gotta fuck up the whole ending of that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, man. Like nobody should be able to beat up Michael Myers, right? And when Busta Rhymes beat him up, I was like, what? This dude's supposed to be like an unstoppable badass, man. He's been stabbed in the neck with a giant. What was that? She stabbed him with like one of those
Coat hanger.
needles.
Or no, yeah, that's right.
He's been shot several times with gigantic rifles. And Busta Rhymes beats him up. Okay, whatever, man. I know Michael's getting old, but he's supposed to be supernatural. Let's stick with it. Nobody ever.
Well, if you hated that, see what they did to him in Halloween Ends.
I don't even. You know what? I didn't even watch it. I didn't watch it.
Yeah, just keep it that way. I don't want you to.
I saw the first one they tried to do, the redact or whatever they call them,
Mm-hmm.
the retcon. Sorry, the retcon. And I saw
Halloween H40, I call it.
Yeah, I saw it and I was like, "This, I don't like this. I think this sucks. I'm not going to watch any more of them." And so I was like, "I don't know." How's Michael scary when he gets beat up by his sister? She who doesn't have that supernatural drive. If they gave her that supernatural drive,
Mm-hmm.
fine. But he's like, this dude, you can't. He was shot 6 times. The guy emptied his gun into him, and he fell out of a second-story window. And he got up and walked away. And he'd been stabbed on top of that in the neck. So, like, and I mean, it's like, how did he live? And then he survived a fire. Oh wait, they didn't do part two, did they?
That's right. It just went off the first one.
Yeah.
So
But still, I mean, like, how is she beating this guy up? Of course, maybe she didn't beat him up. I don't know. I didn't watch it, but I'm not interested in it. So I don't know. I don't want to know.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's best. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, so I was going to ask. So, if someone wanted to submit a story to Unveiling Press, are you guys taking submissions right now, or how does that whole process works?
Well, we just put out in January when I decided to revive the press. We put out a call. I expected to maybe get at the most maybe 30 submissions. And I was like, well, we'll probably end up publishing like 5 books.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll put out another one around October, But we ended up getting well over 100 submissions. And, I know it's probably not, that's not probably a big deal for like bigger presses and stuff. But for when it's essentially just me and one other guy, and I was doing most of the acquisitions because he was doing other things with his personal life. And that's a lot to deal with. So, and there were so many good ones too. And I think because I opened up to so many different genres, it got a lot more quality in there, And so there's so many. We ended up the first run. I think I picked 11 books to publish that I wanted out sooner, and then a second run of like maybe 9 or 10 more. And there's still some books that I'm considering trying to like wanting to publish a little bit later than that if the authors are willing to wait long enough.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, I understand,
Right.
no hard feelings. Because it's like I'm trying to do. I want to have certain ones out within 6 to 8 months, no later than 8 months. I want to do it even before 6. And then the second run, I gave it to like 15 months, but I want to have them out before the year is over.
Right.
The next run would probably be like in the contract. I would probably try to give us 2 years just in case any shit goes on. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I want to get them out before that. I want to get them out maybe within a year or a little bit longer. So I don't know, but technically we've closed to those. I don't know when we're going to open an official submission call again, but technically people can still send their work if they want to nightmarepress@yahoo.com. But who knows when I'd get to it.
Right. Right.
Some guy did send me one well after the call. The call ended on March 10th, and he sent me something in April. His name's James Watjin. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He sent me a book
Mm-hmm.
called The Vermin Sleep. And I looked at it and I was like, well, this is really good. I want this with Nightmare Press. So I read it over and I just went ahead and sent him a contract, So, I mean, if you send something that really gets my attention, yeah, I'll probably sign it. But I don't want to sign people, too many people, and then make them wait forever. You know what I mean? Because
Exactly.
I know like big publishers make you wait a long time. But it sucks. You don't want to have to wait forever. So, yeah, I'm trying to get them out as fast as I can here soon. This past week, we've been dealing with a lot of other stuff, so I haven't been able to really accomplish anything. But Monday, I'm going to try to get and just really just. I'm probably going to go. I might go somewhat silent on social media for a while because Bobby's got some editing he's doing. Because with his job, he has to travel, so he's away a lot.
Right.
But he built the website. I didn't have a website for years until he got one up. So, yeah. So, yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna have to really get serious about getting the editing done and all that, and getting the rest of the submissions reviewed and sent and emailed out. So.
All right. Well, that's good. I mean, obviously, you're still kind of trying to grow it, and you can only do what you can do. But I think it's a good thing that what you're doing is just a matter of having probably enough time and manpower
Yeah.
to
Well, it's good.
do it.
It's a good thing I got Dixon. His name's Dixon Turpin. He
Mm-hmm.
he watches the group a lot, the House of Dark Fiction group. So luckily he's getting he is able to post certain things in there, and he watches a lot of the member requests and post requests. So I don't have a lot of those building up. So it's a good thing I got him around to do that. We tried to get him involved. I tried to get him involved with Nightmare Press, but he couldn't. He had other obligations, so he couldn't. But I got Bobby, so
Well, excellent. Well, Jacob, it was nice having you on for this episode. Thanks for coming on.
all right, well, I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. Well, everyone, hope you enjoyed the episode and check out. And I'm going to put your links to some of your books in the comment section below so people can check those out. And so people can find you on Facebook. Um,
That's the best.
and are you on Instagram?
Nightmare Press has an Instagram. I haven't used it a lot. For some reason, I've been trying to post more on it, but it won't let me load anything up, whether I do it on my phone or a computer or a tower. So
Instagram can be a little.
yeah, and I have we're on X too, but I never really got into X. I never did like Twitter much, and now that it's X, nobody's really on there anyway. So I'm gonna try to get more involved with TikTok, and Bobby has something going on with Discord, but I don't know much about that. He knows more about that than I do.
Yeah. Alrighty then. Well, everyone, check out Jacob, and thanks for coming on this evening. And we'll talk to everyone later.
Thanks.
Goodbye.